Hey, top of the morning to ya. Oh, bloody hell. Would you like a spot of tea? If you are a British person, you were just offended by my accent, I'm sorry. I want to get a funny intro. But welcome, Black Brits. Okay, welcome Black. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited for this video. I feel like this is something that people talk about all the time. And I'm like, yes, I feel like I might even be talking about this in the future more, but today we're going to be talking about Black British folks playing these historically, significant African-American roles. How do people feel about that? Why do people have an issue with that? How do I feel about it? Maybe some of the historical context behind, racism in the UK, how it's very different from America. So I'm really excited to get into it. The reason that people have been talking about this as of late is because of the film Judas and the Black Messiah, where Daniel Kaluuya, who is a black British person, played Fred Hampton. I saw the movie. I thought it was a good movie. But he also is now won like a Golden Globe for the movie, and like people are talking about his performance in the film. And yeah, he's this historical figure. And I think a lot of people are kind of like, okay, so, someone who was Black and British played Harriet Tubman, someone who was Black and British played Martin Luther King, and then someone who's Black and British played Solomon Northup in 12 Years a Slave. So it's kind of like, let's talk about this. It's like, okay, these are some African-American historical trailblazers, like constantly being played by these Black British folks. So I think it's kind of been like on people's minds, kind of been an interesting hot topic, and I think it has come up in the past as well. And I do want to preface this video that I am not the first person who have talked about this. The Grapevine has done a couple videos on it. If you're new to my channel, I love the Grapevine. I'm always shouting out the Grapevine. They have some great videos, kind of just having conversations about this. Samuel L. Jackson kind of talks about this relatively informally. And yeah, I think, so all that to say, I'm not like the first person to kind of break all this down and kind of talk about some of the issues. And I also want to let folks know that in this video, I also will be talking about the fact that African-American folks have also played historically significant African folks. So I just want to let the people know that as well. I'm not going to be talking about it in full length, but if you want a video about it, comment below. But I will be addressing that as well because I think it's very important. So without further ado, I'm really excited. Please go ahead and like this video, subscribe to my channel, hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I post. Black knowledge is Black power, and let's get to it. So before I kind of get into the problem of this, why people have an issue, I want to address some of its historical context, because I think a lot of people feel like, well, racism isn't really a thing in Europe as much as it is in America, or, because it's different, someone can't represent blah, 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 blah. And I think that some aspects of that are true. It definitely looks very different in Europe, but I think that that's not necessarily always the case. So I will say I'm going to do historical context, but I'm going to kind of gloss over some aspects just because I don't want this to be like a super in-depth hour-long video about all the racist structures in Europe and the historical aspects of it. But if you want me to get into the nitty-gritty, all right, I'm out. It's cut. But if you want me to get into the real bare bones of stuff, comment below. Maybe I'll do another video about it. But just preface, I don't want people feeling like, dang, this is not even that thorough. It's I don't want this video to be terribly long. So what I want to start off with saying is that racial breakdowns in Europe look very, very, very different than they do in America. In Europe, a lot of people would feel like race is an American thing. Racism is not really a thing. That's not true. And while there's a culture in Europe to act as if race is a very American thing, like it happened over there, and that's kind of a theme that we'll kind of get into as we go with historical context, there's also this aspect of well, we're European, we're innocent of all that. We don't know what slavery is. That didn't happen here. And it's well, the people who thought up this idea and really orchestrated this whole circus of the transatlantic slave trade were Europeans. So it's what are you talking about? So the reality of the situation is that there's a lot of slave owners in Britain who are involved with the transatlantic slave trade. Now, interestingly enough, slaves were actually taken to majority Brazil and in the Caribbean. Only about 5% were actually taken to America. So that's something I figured, but I thought it'd be way more who were actually taken specifically to America. But it actually was only about 5%, and majority, again, were taken to Brazil and the Caribbean. The reason that this was the case, which is just such a racist feeling, is that Europeans were like, we don't even want Africans breathing on this pristine British land. So we're gonna really make sure everything kind of goes on over there, and maybe we'll have a couple slaves here and there to do whatever, but we're gonna make sure it's facilitated elsewhere because we can't even have it here. We don't even want them here. Like, that's the racism that we're kind of talking about. And again, Europeans are kind of like the ringleaders of this entire transatlantic slave trade. But the thing is that at the time, it's not even like these European people or folks or Europe at the time was like, oh yeah, we're just gonna chill here and everyone's just amazing. In the Industrial Revolution, these Europeans would hang these poor folks who are from there, who are living there, just for stealing some bread or stealing an apple, like literally hang them in the streets. And race and these racist structures, really it's the racist structures. I will say, I think now things have kind of changed more recently in Britain and parts of Europe, but I think back in the day and at these times, it was kind of like, well, we can act like racism isn't a thing because everything happened over there. Like, sure, maybe I didn't see any slaves around here in the UK, but it's like, I for sure know that over there things happened, and because of this feeling of, well, it didn't happen here, that's why these racist conversations have been so taboo to really talk about in Europe. And I will say, some might even say still to this day, they're still kind of taboo to talk about racism, again, because it's like, well, that's America, or that's, out there, or, things weren't really traded and we didn't really see maybe the impact of it, of course, maybe unless you're Black, in Europe. So I kind of wanted to just bring this up to explain and explore why there might be this culture of not wanting to talk about race, but also wanting to kind of be innocent to some of the really racist, terrible things that these slave owners did elsewhere and put in play in terms of like having this big circus happen. Now, if we're looking at today in Britain, it's really interesting and significant to discuss the fact that there is a lot more racial mixing in the UK. Now, in preparation for this video, there's this really dope man, his name is Akala, and he's like a rapper, activist, author, and various things like that. And there's this video, I'm gonna link it below. He provides like a lot of great information. Apparently in the UK, there's not communities where it's like 100% Black people. Like, he's like, you can go to maybe an area and it's like majority Black people, but still it's only gonna be like 60 to 70% Black people, and then 30% either other or 30% like white people. And even this was kind of back in the day, but he was like, coming to America, I would go to like, I'm not gonna say Harlem anymore, but maybe he said like Brooklyn, or just like these historically Black towns. Some could even say like Compton, Inglewood, kind of where you say it and you automatically think like Black people would live there. And he was just like, we don't have that in the UK. It's just a lot more racial mixing, even in these areas where it might be a lot more like Black people. So I was like, that's really interesting because of course, I'm American. I've never even been to the UK, even though I love British shows, but that's not the same thing. So I just want to say that. But, being in America, being from LA, I definitely think there are some places where it's like, okay, if you go to school in that neighborhood and all your friends are in the neighborhood, like, you will not see another kind of person. Like, maybe unless you go, maybe you'll see some Latinx folks or whatever. And depending on where you live, of course, it's different. But I can definitely see a reality where I just wouldn't see any white people maybe until going to college. So it's just interesting also to hear him talk about the fact that it's not even like that in the UK at all because there's so much ingrained racial mixing. He also talks about the fact that in the UK, if we're going to be looking at some of the historical context, of course there was like segregation, but it wasn't segregation like Jim Crow like we had in America. It wasn't necessarily like whites only, Blacks only. Like, there's a color line. You go to this school, we go to this school. Obviously, again, maybe it was segregation, like he's saying, but it just wasn't as like apparent as it was here. Maybe there were racist people, maybe there were racist groups or a couple friends that were like, yeah, we like hanging out with one another, we're all white men, but it wasn't like KKK, like running around, you know, like white hoods going. It wasn't as in your face. Of course, there were people who probably, you know, died, and of course there's police brutality and things like that, but it wasn't like lynching. Like, it wasn't like you drive by in the 40s, 50s in the South and you see black people like hanging, you know. It just kind of gets to the fact that of course there is racism in the UK, but it just was not, it's just different. There was a history of very in-your-face racism in America. Now, while racism isn't necessarily as maybe in your face as it is in America, at the end of the day, when it comes to history though, British folks were still the premier slave traders. So either way, it's still really there. And again, all of this racism, this concept that we have started in Europe, started with these European men. And the fact of the matter is that in the UK, there is a strong legacy of slavery and that the presence of slaves. If we think about these beautiful country homes where it's like this home that's built on like a nice hill and it's like, you know, the backyard is like a field of things like this. It's like that was built with slave wealth. And if we talk about, you know, this art, I feel like people in Europe is like art and museums, and it's like, okay, who do you think collected these ancient paintings? Like, yeah, maybe it was passed on with the family, but yeah, let me tell you what, a lot of slave owners had that art and collected that art, and that's some of the families, you know, that had this. So I just think that there's a lot of aspects of what is very European and things that we think are very pristine and European, and it's like, well, that's because of slavery. And even if we think about the fact that sugar has become an essential part of the British diet from the 18th century and on. So just thinking about just the fact that a lot of these roots still have to do with slavery and it's still really there. And to be honest, like me talking about this, I feel like it's nothing, because I'm like, oh, I'm American. I feel like, you know, I study race, I've studied these kinds of things. So it's like, duh. But I feel like there might be a lot of people who might be, you know, European or Black Brit or whatever, who might feel like, yeah, like that's what it is. But there might be other people in Europe who are like, that's not really true. That's not really accurate. You don't know what you're talking about. And I mean, yeah, maybe I don't, but still, it's just like these facts and things like this. So now that we've kind of gotten some of the historical aspects, we've acknowledged that there is racism in the UK. It's very different from America, but let's talk about the problem. Let's talk about what it is. Let's talk about, you know, this aspect of playing a role and what I think the breakdown of these kinds of things are. So among many problems, here's a big problem. And I think this is a reason I'm going to provide a little context as to why I think sometimes American folks may feel a little like, they're taking the roles. In Britain, in the UK, there's not really a Hollywood. Like, of course, you can be classically trained as a Black actor, you can be in movies, but there's not gonna be a lot of roles and opportunities to be in like a movie where, you know, the main character is a Black person and you're portraying this person. There might not be a lot of opportunities where, you know, you're gonna have a fully Black cast or something like that. And if you are in a show like that, it's new and it's rare, and there's probably a lot of people like fighting for it because it's just so rare. And again, even if you are in something like that, it's not going to get the same buzz as a movie that would be produced in America and Hollywood, things like this. And this is unfortunate. I wish there were a lot of more popular places where media can be produced and it could be shown to on like a vast level, but that's just not the reality. So if we look at Black British folks coming to America to play these roles and things like that, I do think it can kind of come out of well, this is what I need. Like, I'm trying to be an actor and this is the opportunity that's gonna get me to here. Like, this is the mecca of what I can really do. You know, there might not be a lot of roles in the UK that explore racism, that, like I said, have a full Black cast, that, you know, star a Black lead and things like that. And the thing is that I think that's a very real aspect of the situation. It's like, well, dang, what am I gonna do? Like, I'm trying to be an actor. I want roles, But then at the same time, on the other side, which I also understand, is that I do feel like there can be an aspect of displacement. And I kind of think that that's kind of the basic underlying issue that I think some, like, maybe if you're, I'm gonna put myself in the perspective, if you're like a Black actor or, you know, someone, you know, whatever, maybe you wanted the role. I think there's a real history, obviously, you can watch any of my videos, in America of, you know, white people, European folks kind of coming to America and taking opportunities. And I do think that maybe some people have that fear of like, well, y'all keep coming here and y'all keep taking these roles that I should take or I should have or I should whatever. So I will say that one of the problems of many is that I do think there's like two sides of like, well, you know, I'm just trying to come here and work and this is the hub. It's like, you know, you want to go to journalism, you want to go where? You want to learn about cooking, you go here. Like, it's kind of like that. But then there is also this aspect of like, well, you are European and you have a privilege. And it's like, you know, European and American have very different privileges, but it's just like you being a European person coming here and taking this Black role for a Black American or, you know, whatever, it might feel a little bit of displacement. That person may feel a little displaced. So that's one problem that I wanted to address because I do think that can be a reality for some folks, not all, but some folks. Now, I think another problem that a lot of people have is this idea or feeling that Black British people don't know what it's like to be African American. And even though, yes, they maybe know about racism, you know, their ancestors weren't these historical people. Their grandfathers weren't these African American historical figures in the way that African Americans maybe were. You know, maybe you won't say like my dad was MLK, but you might say like, well, my dad, I remember, or my dad's dad went to an MLK rally and whatever. I do think being an actor, you know, you should be able to just put on a role, and everyone has a different process and things like that. But I do think that's something that a lot of people say, where it's like, well, how can you play this person, or you shouldn't be allowed to play this person because you are so far removed from what the actual experience of that person's life would have been like, especially specifically with these historical figures. Now, in my opinion, you know, if you're playing, you know, Chadwick Boseman playing a fictional T'Challa, it's like R.I.P. It's kind of like, okay, this is a fictional character, you know, Daniel Kaluuya playing in Get Out, again, a fictional thing. But I think when people are like, well, this is my historical, you know, this is people I've learned about, my parents told me about, and it's being played by a Black British person, I also feel like there's an aspect of, well, you don't even know about that, really, you know. And what I will say to that is that, you know, in a perfect world, of course, you'll have an actor who knows what it's like, or will have had a grandfather who can tell them what it was like to live in the whatever, or have an authentic experience. But at the same time, you know, I think if you're a director, producer, whatever, and you just want to make a good movie, you might think like, okay, well, you know, yeah, I'd ideally want this person to be African American, but if this British person can do the role great, then that's what it is. And I think that's the case for Daniel Kaluuya. I know Jordan Peele in Get Out ideally kind of wanted maybe somebody who was African American, but after seeing his performance, he was just like, oh no, this is the guy to do it. He's delivering the role, he's doing it. And I know a similar thing happened with the Judas and the Black Messiah movie. Apparently Fred Hampton's wife or girlfriend and son came to the set one day and saw Daniel Kaluuya, you know, embodying Fred Hampton, and was like, nope, this is who I want. Like, look, he's really embodying, like, he's doing it, he's him. So I do think there is an aspect of who can just play it the best when it comes to like the production side of a film. There might be some people who are like, well, ideally I'd love it to be authentic or whatever, but I do think there's an aspect of like, well, who can do it the best? Who can elicit this? Who can make this movie the most successful, unfortunately, for some folks. And what I will say as well, which is something I think people might be kind of ignorant to, and which is why I really want to explore the historical context, racism isn't just an African American thing. It's obvious, but I think sometimes being American, I can attest to it too, but just I think we're very like me. I think we're very like, nobody knows what it's like to be me. And of course, nobody knows what it's like to be you. Nobody knows what it's like to be a Black American. But there is racism other places too. So while, you know, maybe Daniel Kaluuya, of course, doesn't know what it's like to be Fred Hampton, you know, doesn't know what it's like to have been in Chicago in the, you know, 70s or 60s or whatever, he might be able to draw from a racist experience that he's had in his life being a Black British person. So I really do want to drive that home, because it's just like, you know, just because somebody, maybe they're Black and maybe they're, you know, with a white person and they're British, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have never experienced racism and can't necessarily draw from something. You know, so that's what I wanted to acknowledge as well. Because the thing is, while racism sure isn't as in your face in the UK as it is in America, it's still there. Like, it's still there, it's still affecting people. So, you know, I think we really also have to just make sure we're always acknowledging that, yes, while we are American, we have a very specific experience with racism. It's not the only experience with racism. Now, something that I talked about earlier, I think that if we're gonna continue to want to have this conversation, I think it should be fair, because I think that there have been American actors who have played historically African trailblazers, roles, whatever. So to me, I think if we're gonna have this conversation and do this, which I'm fine with, I do think there needs to be an acknowledgement of like, okay, so then who can play who? Like, I think that maybe has some people feeling like, like maybe some people are like, I don't want an American person playing an African leader. And I just think that comes and begs a bigger question of like, well, what is the role of an actor? Like, can an actor really study hard and put on an accent and, you know, really get into a character enough to essentially fool the audience and really, you know, take it there? Or should that not be a thing? Comment down below what you think, because I'm like, if we're gonna be mad about Black Brits coming here and playing these roles, then we gotta be mad about the fact that Forest Whitaker played Desmond Tutu, Will Smith played Dr. Bennett Omalu in Concussion, or that Denzel played Steve Biko in Cry Freedom. So with that being said, I'm like, okay, so, you know, everyone has privileges, I think, to be able to kind of go these places and do these roles and be successful at it. But what I will say, bringing up this point, and comment below what you think, I might be ignorant to this, I have never seen an American person successfully on a big scale play like a Black British person. Now, of course, I know in the UK as well, like a lot of times it's more like, okay, well, you're like Nigerian, you're, you know, like very specific aspects of being African, and that's like maybe what that they go by or whatever, versus like you're just a Black Brit or you're just a Black American and things like that. But still, I feel like I have not seen that. Like, I have not seen an American be able to play like a Black British person really like that, like put on the accent. But again, comment below, because maybe I just haven't seen some stuff. But overall, all that to say, I definitely think we're dealing with privileges here. I think there's a European privilege. I think there's an American privilege to be able to go and play these roles and these, you know, African roles and, you know, whatever. I think a lot of people though would feel like a lot of these American folks who are playing these African roles like are not doing it justly. So I will say that's like a thing I've seen. But yeah, I just think overall there also is this aspect of like privilege, who can successfully play who, what, and things like that. What I also want to acknowledge when we're talking about the problem is that I do also feel like there is this aspect of exoticism when it comes to Black British people that I think Hollywood just eats up. I think, you know, mass media just kind of eats up. It's the fact that it's like, whoa, you're Black, you look like a Black person, an American Black person, African Black person, whatever, but you sound European. And I think that there is like a fetishism, there's an exoticism, there's, you know, these things that come along with that. And I think that that's inherently just terribly problematic. And I think that some people would say that, especially when we look at the fact that I think a lot of these Black British folks like get super high acclaim, awards and things like that for putting on these American roles, and then you take it off and it's like, actually I'm British. So I do want to acknowledge that, because I do think that is an aspect of being European. Like, yes, they're Black, and of course if you're Black, you know, whatever, but I do think that there is this aspect of exoticism where it's like, ooh, a British accent is just so like, you know, like so I just wanted to acknowledge that as well, in terms of a problem that I think is very real, and I think that unfortunately people eat that up. So now that we got kind of what's the historical context, now that we got kind of what the problem of this is, I'm gonna get into my tips. It really is just one tip. I think this video I think was more of like a let's have a conversation, like how do you feel about this, for I guess me. So comment below please what you think about this. I honestly only have one tip because I only have one good nail left. But my main tip is that if you're gonna get hot, if you're gonna be upset that these Black British people are coming here and playing these American leaders, very valid, understandable, keep that same energy when these American actors are playing these African leaders, important people, and doing their thing. I just think that I don't like this conversation. I don't like sometimes this conversation because I feel like it kind of makes it seem like it kind of leaves some of the accountability out. Of course, at the end of the day though, if you're an actor, like some people might genuinely just feel like if you're an actor, you can play whoever as long as you play it right. I'm fine. I think a lot of people loved Judas and the Black Messiah. I think it was good. My personal opinion, I do think that Daniel Kaluuya's accent, it didn't sound authentic. I'm not gonna lie. I think he's great. I love Daniel Kaluuya. And again, I think he did a great performance. I think he embodied like the physical aspect of Fred Hampton. Like I feel like he just did it, but I think the accent thing was a barrier. But again, I just think that ultimately you gotta keep the same energy. And I lied, I guess. I have 2 good nails. So tip number 2 would also be that we need to keep acknowledging that Black people experience racism everywhere. It's not, racism is not just an American thing. So I think, you know, if we're gonna get upset that people are playing these roles, you know, things like that, it's like, well, if it's a role that has to do with race, let's not act like Black British folks just don't know what that is. Now, I do think it's accurate and understandable, of course, to feel this aspect of displacement. I would love, personally, I want to see a Black movie where an African American person is playing a Black like trailblazer. I do want to see that. I think that would be refreshing. I think that is, I'm ready for that personally, because I do feel like there is this trend. My biggest thing is like, okay, I wish it was more even. That's my biggest thing, because I do kind of feel like, you know, what we've seen is kind of been like these Black British folks playing these roles. I'm not necessarily mad at that, but I do feel like I want it to even out a little more so we can be like, okay, well, there's also a lot of African American folks who've been playing these historical roles, and of course there have been African American folks, Denzel, Malcolm X, who was iconic. So you know, I do think it should be more even. So I will say I am excited to see more of that, hopefully in the future. But again, you know, if you're Black, you probably know what it's like to experience racism, and I'm not going to invalidate that. And at the end of the day, I'm here for Black people making money. I mean, capitalism is terrible, of course, but at the end of the day, if you're making money, you're Black, I'm gonna clap. So that's all I have for today, folks. Please comment below. Let me know what you think. Let me know how you feel. If you feel like it's not that deep to me. If you're like, no, it's pretty deep to me. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm just so happy to be here on this platform. I'm happy to be able to kind of like talk about these things and, you know, help teach people, but also this helps me too and like, you know, inform what I kind of talk about. So, you know, check me out on Instagram. I also post my videos on IGTV. I post every other Sunday, so look out on Sundays for your girl Aziza. Black knowledge is black power. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I post. I will see y'all next time, and thank you so much for tuning in.